Hi guys, it's Jessica. Today I want to discuss whether or not you can review something that you haven't seen all the way through from beginning to end. And the quick answer is going to be it kind of depends. As a broad rule, you don't have to finish something to be able to provide an accurate or worthwhile review. You might not even have to view or read any of it to give a worthwhile and interesting review, depending on a couple other factors that we're going to discuss later in the video. But just starting with something like a book that you started reading and stopped reading for whatever reasons, then decide to review or mark as read, I think you can totally do that. And one of the reasons I think you can do that is because, hey, you tried the book, it didn't work out, and unless you just stopped reading it because you weren't in the mood, you probably have a reason you stopped reading that book that is valid and makes your opinion/review worthwhile. So if you stopped reading the book because there were a lot of grammar errors, or you stopped reading the book because it was very predictable, or you stopped reading the book because the plot wasn't interesting, or the characters weren't interesting, or maybe you found some offensive material in the book, or maybe the dialogue wasn't believable. It doesn't matter how far in you got to the book. If you stopped reading for any of those reasons, they're not only valid, but they're really helpful. Your review, response, explanation would definitely help other readers. And the same is true with a movie. If you get into a movie and you decide you don't like the style, or the characters, or the plot, and you stop, and these are the reasons you stop saying
hey, I got halfway through and quit for these reasons,
I think you can even give it a star review or a rating. I assume the rating and or star review will be lower, which is the real reason I think people don't want you to be allowed to write a review if you haven't finished something because you
didn't give it a full chance.
But I just don't think that's true. If you didn't put in the time and the work to make the beginning and the middle good and compelling, I had to wait all the way to the end for something worthwhile to happen, and that's kind of on you. And you deserve that kind of critique and feedback for your work.
And who is to say what a fair chance is? If I read a book and the first third of it is just grammar errors all over the place,
why do I have to hear that person out? And another thing is people assume that I'm going to give something a bad review because I stopped watching or I stopped reading it, and that's not actually true either. Oftentimes I give a middle of the road review or even a positive review to something that I didn't finish reading, and I'll explain in the review
hey, I stopped reading at X point, these were the problems for me, but I can see these positive things happening, and I think a reader who enjoys these kinds of things, or I think a reader who's looking for this kind of thing, would still love this book.
And because of that, because I see the appeal and I see the promise in it, even though it's not for me, I'm going to go ahead and review it recommend it to a larger reading public. And I do the same thing with shows too. Also, sometimes the reason I stop watching shows is because the season break is too long. So maybe I really enjoyed the show and would have watched it in a bingeable series, so I'm giving it a higher rating. With movies, usually if I stop watching it, there's a reason and it's really bad. I'm not gonna lie, movies specifically, if I walk away from a movie, there's usually something very wrong with it and I don't recommend it going forward. I guess it's possible I can think of one horror movie that I stopped watching because it was too graphic for me. It freaked me out. It wasn't even that graphic, to be honest. And I can't remember what it was. It was some random one on Netflix at one point in time. The scene that was happening on the show was a horror serial killer one, and I just stopped watching there and I never went back. I didn't review that one either, is the other side. I didn't give it a thumbs up, a thumbs down, I didn't give any stars, nothing like that. And part of the reason I didn't, the fact that it freaked me out personally was something about me. It wasn't even that the scene itself was objectively graphic, and I really wasn't far enough into the movie to know. So I think people who prescribe when you can review something and that you have to have finished reading it or finished watching it to review it, they're really not giving the viewer enough credit. We know when we like something and when we don't like something, and we know when we've gone in far enough to review a whole thing, and we know enough to know whether it was just not for us or to know if it wasn't for a larger audience. And usually the people who stop and actually write reviews or blog reviews, we're more interested in the show or the media than the rest of the public. Whether or not you finish something, we should be trusted to know whether or not we have the right to review it. And the other argument I'll bring in is I don't have to touch a stove that's on to know that it's hot. The same is true for certain movies or shows or books. If it's a reoccurring series with reoccurring themes where I am familiar with the past work of that author, the past themes they've done, or even the plot lines up until that point. I can tell you things about that show or that book without ever reading it. And that might not be the same as a review. I do think if you've never watched it, you probably can't give a review. It's probably more like an analysis, a prediction, or like an explanation of why that thing doesn't appeal to you and what it could do instead to pitch that better to you. But I do think that people who haven't seen something, especially if it's a series or a part of a larger framework, probably have some valid and interesting opinions and shouldn't just be dismissed because they've never seen it. And this is kind of like a slightly off-topic rant for me because I have limited interest in certain genres that people think I should be really into. And because of that, I can explain to them exactly why I'm not into that movie or genre or TV show or book without ever reading it. And people oftentimes can get defensive when they're like,
oh, you should read this, you should read that.
And you're like,
Yeah, I'm probably not going to.
or thank you for the recommendation. And then you go on with your life and they keep asking you whether or not you've gotten to it yet. And finally, I'll have to be like,
I'm not going to watch or read or whatever this thing you recommended to me for these reasons.
they tend to get like really defensive and like,
That's the kind of thing you would like. I know it's the kind of thing you would like.
and it's just not true. I'm very picky. What I like for really like niche specific reasons. And because of that, it can be very hard to recommend things to me. And I'm not always willing to give something a try either is the other thing, because I am fussy and picky. It has to be something that's readily available to me, that is a lower cost investment, and usually it has to be something I'm in the mood to see or to read. So even if you recommend the perfect thing to me, it might not be the right time for me to watch it. And I just think that's something that people should take into account. Like, I recommend things all the time. I just throw them out there to people like,
Oh, like this movie or like that movie or oh, like this book or that book. No, okay.
and I just keep narrowing it down because the conversation I want to have is, what does that person like? What are they into? What have they seen or not seen? Let's keep narrowing it down and comparing, get a cross section, and that'll give me a better estimate of them as a person and like their media profile overall. These kind of things interest me probably because I'm a little bit of a creative person and I do my own reading and writing in my own off time. These are the kind of topics that really get me interested in a person and really make me think that I'm learning something about their personality without them telling it to me directly. To a certain extent, things that you don't finish can tell us more about a person than things that you do finish. So shutting down a conversation with like, I only got to the first page, or I only got halfway through, or a third of the way through, or I really only skimmed the book, is a disservice to the conversation we're having about that property and to a larger conversation we're having about getting to know people or getting an idea for another person's likes or dislikes. Overall, you should definitely be able to put reviews on things that you don't finish. If you found something so distasteful that you stopped reading, or so much of a problem that you stopped reading, that's something that a reader should know going in. And if you love the book and keep reading it over and over again and coming back to it, and it's helped you through all these troubling times and it meant something huge to you, that's also great and also something a reader should know. But either way, I don't think we should decide who is and isn't allowed to give a review. And there shouldn't be a limit, like you have to get at least this far through a book before you're allowed to say you've read it, or you have to get this far through a movie to say that you've watched it. I have opinions on things I haven't seen and will never see. I have opinions on things I got 2 pages into and stopped. And you know, the flip side is I DNF'd something 2 months ago. I was a third of the way through and I just stopped reading it because I wasn't in the mood. If you're looking to know whether or not you are a reviewer, I actually have this video over here about whether booktubers and other lay people are reviewers and what some of the dynamics are there. And if you're looking for more meta book criticism kind of things, I have a playlist for that right here. Let me know if you enjoyed this video by leaving a like. And if you're looking for more content like this, it's either analysis of reviewers and dynamics, or if it's just diving more into stories specifically with a fantasy science fiction vibe, consider subscribing to my channel. I try to put videos out twice a week, but I always have at least one out every week. As always, keep reading, and I'll talk to you next time.